Las Vegas, Nevada, one of the most iconic cities in the world. Today, it's the site of scores of glittering palace casinos that reach high into the night sky. A place where fortunes are made and lost, where the dreams of even the most downtrodden can come true in the turn of a card or a spin of the wheel. It's a place where any and all desires can be fulfilled. But behind Las Vegas's glittering facade hides a sinister and deadly history. Welcome to American Mafia. I'm Mark Wesley Curran, your host in this documentary series that explores the rise and fall of organized crime in America in her most highly revered cities. I'll take you behind the scenes into the history of how the Mafia infiltrated our nation's history in its early years, corrupted our most respected institutions, and ascended to be one of the most feared and powerful organizations in the world. In its early years, Las Vegas was just a whistle stop on the way to someplace else. It was a cowboy town. Bolstered by abundant groundwater, it was a popular oasis as travelers made their way across the hot and dusty desert. The city of Las Vegas was incorporated on March 16, 1911, and in 1919, Prohibition was ratified with all consumption, manufacturing, and distribution of liquor banned. But on September 7, 1929, work began on the building of Boulder Dam, which brought hundreds of workers and their families to Las Vegas. In the following years, Las Vegas went from being a frontier boom town to a major Western-style gambling mecca. As small gambling joints opened all along Highway 91, little did anyone know this was the humble beginning of what would later be known as the famous Las Vegas Strip. In 1930, the Union Pacific Railroad connected Las Vegas to Boulder City, and in 1931, the Nevada legislature relaxed marriage and divorce laws and repealed its gambling ban. This would open the door for legal gambling. Although Prohibition was still in effect, many small enterprises served illegal liquor, and speakeasy establishments sprung up all over the city.
If the Strip has a birth date, it's April 3rd, 1941. That's the day the El Rancho Vegas opened at the corner of what's now Sahara and the Strip. And it was a resort hotel because it had the rooms, the casinos, and the amenities. It only had about 65 rooms, which today isn't even the floor of one hotel casino in Las Vegas. But it was the beginning. And about a year and a half later comes the Hotel Last Frontier. Now, if you think about it, you've got El Rancho Vegas, Hotel Last Frontier. The names tell you something. They're Old West style. They have a theme. They're supposed to evoke the Old West. Then along comes the Flamingo, which is supposed to be the luxury hotel. And that sets the Strip on a different path thematically. And since the mob will end up running the Flamingo, it also is a different path in terms of ownership too.
The following year, the Paradise Club opened on Highway 91, which later would be known as the famous Las Vegas Strip. The man who owned the club was Frank Dietrich, who came to be known as Las Vegas's first mobster. Another roadhouse, the Red Rooster, opened a year after the Paradise, a mile further on down Highway 91, becoming the first club in the area seen by passing motorists. On May 5, 1931, the county issued the Paradise's manager, Oscar E. Clawitter, a license to run a roulette table, a craps table, and a blackjack table. Weeks later, the club was open to the public and would later be the target of raids by the federal government. Dietrich's club encountered problems with the U.S. government, which threatened to close it down because of their illegal alcohol sales. But unlike the Red Rooster, the Paradise was not raided by federal agents. Throughout most of the 1930s, the Paradise was the more successful of the two clubs. It featured gaming, live orchestras, singers, dancing, and Italian food. In the late 1930s, Guy McAfee entered the picture. He was a former Los Angeles police captain who had amassed a small fortune soliciting payoffs from the bookmakers he was supposed to arrest. He purchased Dietrich's Roadhouse and renamed it the 91 Club. McAfee was considered one of LA's biggest underworld leaders, with reporters calling him the Al Capone of Los Angeles. His relocation to Las Vegas in 1939 was front-page news.
So 1931 was really double-edged for Guy McAfee. One of his former associates was this political gang boss named Charlie Crawford, was shot dead in a double homicide. So that kind of elevated McAfee's to the top of the underworld within the ranks of that combination that they'd put together. But at the same time, he took a lot of heat because he was actually the prime suspect in Crawford's murder. And there was actually a lot of motive too. So allegedly Crawford had found God, turned a leaf, and was acting out against his former associates. And he was feeding intel and allegedly even funding a magazine called The Critic of Critics. And shortly after that paper dubbed McAfee the Al Capone of Los Angeles, Crawford was murdered along with the magazine editor Herbert Spencer. 1931 was also the year that my great-grandfather, Jack Dragna, had took over the local mafia in Los Angeles. So if you read the federal files, they highlight that right around that time, him and his organization began to muscle into the gambling operations of primarily Guy McAfee and Tudor Scherer. So after that, the Italians were really cut in, as the Fed said. So in his 1969 bestseller, The Grim Reapers, Reed actually credits my great-grandfather, stating that Jack Dragna inadvertently kickstarted Las Vegas by muscling into the bookmaking operations of McAfee and others in LA. And ultimately, he drove them out of LA and into the arms of Southern Nevada.
It was during those early years the mob speculated that at the close of Prohibition, Las Vegas would become a source of unlimited cash, and they were right. So began the gold rush that would bring organized crime to Las Vegas. By the late 1940s, the mob nationwide was looking for new opportunities for fast, easy, illegal money. They saw their opportunity in the boom town of Las Vegas. It was a place that had grown from a dusty whistle stop to a thriving and promising new bonanza. By then, the mob had taken control over illegal gambling, drugs, and prostitution in major cities coast to coast. It would not be long before the Mafia would turn their attention to Glitter Gulch. In the early 1940s, Lansky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel drove across the desert from Los Angeles to the dusty railroad stop called Las Vegas. With temperatures soaring near 115 degrees, the wires in their Cadillac melted. There were times when I thought I would die in that desert, Lansky is quoted as saying in The Money and the Power. Vegas was a horrible place. Lansky initially had dispatched Siegel to Las Vegas to take control of racetrack bets humming over the wires. Contrary to legend, it was Lansky, not Siegel, who envisioned what Las Vegas would become.
Meyer Lansky was kind of the Secretary of the Treasury of organized crime, I like to say. I've often thought if Lansky came along today, I'd put him in charge of the Federal Reserve or something, and all of our economic problems would be solved. He had a head for figures. He was a good diplomat. He grew up on the streets of New York, met Siegel when they were kids, and Lansky would get beaten up, would talk people out of beating him up, got into gangs, got involved in various forms of thuggery. But he was the money man, and he was, in a sense, Siegel's diplomatic representative.
Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was one of the most infamous and feared gangsters of his day. Born Benjamin Siegelbaum on February 28, 1906, to Russian Jewish immigrants in Brooklyn, New York, Ben resented and vowed to rise above the poverty surrounding him. He sought wealth, fame, and power, and by the age of 14, Ben Siegel, as he had others call him, had already started his own gang. Employing tactics that were a foreshadowing of what was to come, Siegel began his gang by offering, in return for regular payments for his services, to protect pushcart peddlers' carts and goods from the frequent burglaries and vandalism that plagued them. The unsuspecting and penniless cart owners would almost always turn down Siegel's offer. Flying into a rage, Siegel would douse the carts in kerosene, light them on fire, and demand payment. The peddlers, having little choice, would pay Siegel, falling under his so-called protection.
Bugsy Siegel apparently came to Las Vegas around 1941, and how much of it was his idea, how much of it was his colleague's idea, there's a lot we don't know. He didn't write an autobiography. He was not noted for doing an oral history or writing letters. Siegel arrives in Las Vegas actually to be involved in the race wire business. The whole idea that you have all this betting on horse racing, a lot of it is tied to the mob. If you control the wire, you can control the bookies, and you can control a lot of money.
Bugsy Siegel arrived, he was assigned to go check it out by Meyer Lansky in about 1941, and that was the year that the state legalized race wires. And so he thought that he could take the race wire away from the LA operators and put it where it was legal in Las Vegas. And so that was 1941. He succeeded finally in doing that in 1942.
Siegel was drawn to Las Vegas in 1945 by his interest in legalized gambling and off-track betting. He purchased the El Cortez Hotel for $600,000 and later sold it for a $166,000 profit. He supervised the opening of the Flamingo Hotel and spent lavish sums of money preparing it, and a marketing campaign was launched to draw celebrities from Hollywood. On December 26, 1946, Siegel opened the glitzy Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. Comedian Jimmy Durante headlined the night's entertainment. Some of Bugsy Siegel's Hollywood friends, including actors George Rapp, George Sanders, Sonny Tufts, and George Tessel, were in attendance. The grand opening of the Flamingo Hotel, however, was not a success. Bad weather kept many other Hollywood guests from arriving, and because gamblers had no rooms at the hotel, they took their winnings and gambled elsewhere. The casino lost $300,000 in the first week of operation. Siegel and his New York partners had invested $1 million in a property already under construction by Billy Wilkerson. Wilkerson was the owner of the Hollywood Reporter, as well as some very popular nightclubs on the Sunset Strip. Wilkerson had wanted to recreate the Sunset Strip in Las Vegas, but he soon ran out of money due to the high cost of materials immediately after the war. 2 weeks after the grand opening, the Flamingo closed down. It reopened March 1, 1947 as the Fabulous Flamingo. Siegel forced Wilkerson out in April, and by May, the resort reported a profit, but it wasn't enough to save Siegel. Convinced that Siegel was on the take, it is widely believed that his partners in the mob had him killed while he was reading the paper, June 20, 1947, at girlfriend Virginia Hill's Beverly Hills mansion. Hill was in Paris, having flown the coop after a fight with Siegel 10 days prior, when a killer shot through the window with a .30 caliber military M1 carbine. The crime remains unsolved to this day.
Bugsy Siegel's murder is technically still, according to the Beverly Hills Police Department, an unsolved case. And maybe the proof of that is that there are so many versions of how it must have happened. We know he gets shot while at the home of Virginia Hill. We know there's a person with him who apparently just dives under the couch, pretty much. But who did it and why? Everything from money being stolen from the Flamingo by Siegel and Hill, allegedly, to a rumor that it really had nothing to do with the Flamingo, and that it was actually Virginia Hill's brother who resented his mistreatment of Virginia. There are stories of people being hired to do it. We really don't know exactly who did it. And as I say, there are theories. And until it's solved, it looks increasingly to me like Murder on the Orient Express, where everybody walked in the room and got one shot.
After Siegel's murder, mob-connected managers Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum took over and made the Flamingo profitable. This group combined physical and business toughness. It included longtime Phoenix bookmaker and veteran casino operator Gus Greenbaum, Mo Sedway, and Ben Goffstein. Some had a history of violence, but all were experienced businessmen. By the start of the 1950s, the stage was set for the American Mafia to make Las Vegas their own personal piggy bank. With increasing federal pressure, the mob needed a new playground. Sin City would not disappoint. It was the beginning of a new era in crime, one that would change the city of Las Vegas forever. During the 1950s and 1960s, mobsters helped build the Sahara, the Sands, the New Frontier, and the Riviera. Money from organized crime was combined with funds from the more respectable investors. Some of these included Wall Street banks, union pension funds, the Mormon Church, and the Princeton University Endowment. Tourists flocked to the resorts. $8 million a year by 1954. They were drawn by performers such as Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Elvis Presley, and by rows of slot machines and gaming tables. Meyer Lansky, known as the mob's accountant, was a major American organized crime figure who, along with his associate Charles Lucky Luciano, was instrumental in the development of the National Crime Syndicate in the United States. Associated with the Jewish mob, Lansky developed a gambling empire that stretched across the world. He was said to own points in casinos in Las Vegas, Cuba, the Bahamas, and London. Although a member of the Jewish mob, Lansky undoubtedly had strong influence with the Italian-American Mafia and played a large role in the consolidation of the criminal underworld. Over the next 2 decades, almost every hotel casino in Las Vegas had some connection to Lansky and his New York-Miami branch of organized crime. Their builders often had run illegal casinos in various locations from Providence, Rhode Island to Portland, Oregon, from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Dallas, Texas. As a syndicate leader in Las Vegas, Gus Greenbaum was placed in charge of running the Flamingo. Greenbaum would order the deaths of Anthony Brancato and Anthony Trombino for robbing a syndicate hotel. The murder was carried out by Los Angeles crime family soldier Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano. But Greenbaum was a man who had developed a few problems that had placed him at odds with his mob brothers. Greenbaum's worsening gambling, womanizing, and drug habits eventually caused him to begin skimming from casino operations. His embezzlement was discovered by the Chicago outfit.
Gus Greenbaum and Mo Sedway end up owning the El Cortez downtown together. And the guy who originally built the El Cortez also built the Thunderbird, and for some reason, allies of Meyer Lansky ended up with both of them. And that's the thing. Greenbaum comes out of Phoenix, where he's been involved in bookmaking. Sedway comes out of New York. He drove the Prohibition-era trucks for Siegel and Lansky. But they're together running this because this is a sort of national or even international conglomerate. It's organized crime. They're pretty organized. Now, Greenbaum goes on to be the head man, really, at the Flamingo. He wants to retire, and they use their powers of persuasion, apparently killing a family member, to get him to come out of retirement and run the Riviera after it's built. Eventually, he's murdered. And to this day, there's a debate because it was a messy murder, and his wife was killed. And usually, a professional hitman isn't messy and doesn't have to kill other family members.
On December 3, 1958, Greenbaum and his wife Bess were found dead in their Phoenix home. Their throats had been cut with a butcher knife. Under increasing pressure from federal prosecutors, Meyer Lansky fled to Cuba, where he would set up operations at casinos there with the sanction of Cuban President Fulgencio Batista. He, along with mobster Lucky Luciano, would build an empire in Cuba, which flourished until Cuban dictator Fidel Castro took over and nationalized gambling, effectively putting an end to the mob's involvement in Cuba. By 1960, with the mob's rise on the Strip, state gaming regulators created the notorious List of Excluded Persons, more commonly known as the Black Book of Undesirables. These men were banned for casinos to keep a closer eye on the mob. In the first wave of inductees, regulators placed the names of 11 underworld figures, including then Mafia boss Sam Giancana and Kansas City crime lords Nick and Carl Savella, into the book. After President John F. Kennedy was elected, his younger brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, went on a crusade against the mob nationwide and sought to rid Las Vegas casinos of its influence. In Senate hearings, Bobby Kennedy famously went after Sam Giancana. Up until the mid-1960s, the mob had enjoyed almost unlimited growth in Las Vegas. But the dark clouds were growing on the horizon. As federal authorities and local regulators put the squeeze on the mob, Las Vegas would become the battleground between the forces of good and evil, in control of the greatest gambling empire the world had ever known. Through the 1960s, Las Vegas realized it needed a way to attract the high rollers to the casinos that had sprung up from downtown to the Strip. The mob had control over virtually every major hotel in the city and knew it needed a draw. That answer was entertainment. The showrooms of Las Vegas featured some of the greatest and biggest names in the entertainment industry. This would ensure high rollers from all walks of life would come to Las Vegas for the entertainment and stay at the gaming tables. Comedians Jimmy Durante, Sophie Tucker, Milton Berle, and Joe E. Lewis, all veterans of nightclubs in vaudeville, were among the first names to grace marquees and help draw well-dressed crowds that included Hollywood actors and free-spending gamblers. The Las Vegas Strip became the glitzy arena for the likes of Frank Sinatra, Dinah Shore, and the Rat Pack. Large-scale production shows from Paris gave rise to the iconic showgirl, which would become the enduring image of Las Vegas.
The 1960s in Las Vegas, in terms of entertainment, were pretty similar to what had come before in the 50s, but what you tended to have in the showrooms would be a headliner and an opening act. So if it's a comedian headliner, it's a musical opening act, vice versa. But they would also have a line of showgirls. They might have some other acts. Think vaudeville or the old Ed Sullivan Show. If you're not happy with the singers, the acrobats are coming out in a minute. Now, at the same time, you had these big-name entertainers, big singers like Sinatra and Martin, comedians like Johnny Carson, coming in and doing these shows. And they tended to be events. People looked forward to seeing who was going to come in. There were also great production shows. In 1958, the Stardust opened with the Lido de Paris. So the Tropicana went out and got the Folies Bergère. Then the Dunes got the Casino de Paris. And you had these shows choreographed by a guy named Don Arden, where there was a particular walk that the showgirls were to have. And these shows would usually involve a variety of acts. Siegfried and Roy, who later become perhaps the biggest names in Las Vegas entertainment in their time, start out at the Tropicana as part of the Folies Bergère and then are in the Lido. They're one of many acts.
Casino operators were willing to spend big money to outdo one another by bringing in the biggest names in entertainment. Actress Marlene Dietrich received an unprecedented $35,000 a week to perform at the Sahara in 1953, while Liberace's salary seemed to increase with every appearance. He set a record by receiving $50,000 a week to open the Riviera in 1955. And by 1972, he was earning $300,000 a week. The Las Vegas Strip had become the most happening place on Earth, and the opening of new resorts brought even more entertainment luminaries to prominence as showroom stars. The 1966 opening of Caesar's Palace featured singer Andy Williams and the Lennon Sisters, followed by a rotating roster of stars that eventually would include Diana Ross, Cher, Paul Anka, George Burns, Willie Nelson, and Julio Iglesias. Little known when she first played Las Vegas, Barbra Streisand was reportedly paid $50,000 to open the International, just off the Strip, in 1969.
Something that's worth noting about these shows, the showrooms were not large by today's standards, and shows were to be 90 minutes to 2 hours, because the owners of the casinos wanted people gambling. The shows were cheap. Frank Sinatra once said, for $6 you get filet mignon and me. And then at midnight you had the cocktail show. You have a couple of drinks. And it wasn't that they lost money on the gambling. The question was whether the entertainer brought in gamblers. And Sinatra brought in high rollers, he's fine. But Las Vegas would experiment. They would bring in people who you would think would be great entertainers. They didn't bring in the gamblers. They're not back. There are other people, oh, they're big TV stars. We'll try them. Didn't necessarily work.
The mob bosses who ran the casinos didn't just stop at the showrooms to attract the high rollers to Vegas. They were innovative, hosting major golf tournaments and prize fights to attract tourists and money. They understood business, often investing outside the Strip. The classic example, Desert Inn boss Mo Dalitz formed a development company that built housing tracts, country clubs, and shopping centers. Morris Mo Dalitz was an American gangster, businessman, casino owner, and philanthropist. He was one of the major figures who shaped Las Vegas in the 20th century. He was often referred to as Mr. Las Vegas. His investments in Las Vegas began in the late 1940s with the Desert Inn. When the original builder of the resort, Wilbur Clark, ran out of money, Dalitz and the Cleveland Mayfield Road gang bailed him out. The casino opened in 1950. Clark remained the public face and frontman of the resort. Dalitz quietly remained in the background as the real owner.
Mo Dalitz was a former bootlegger and gambler from Cleveland that gravitated out to Las Vegas as gambling got going and Prohibition took out bootlegging. And he's a gambler, he's good with numbers. He gets out there, he has good connections with the Teamsters. He's probably one of the guys that helped get the Teamsters loans going, along with other mob guys he knew back in Cleveland.
Mo Dalitz was interesting in that he's probably one of the only gangsters who ended up with a legitimate fortune. People love the mythology that these guys end up with vast amounts of money, and they may in the form of cash. Mo Dalitz, however, was a legal owner of his casinos, primarily the Desert Inn. He also invested very heavily in Las Vegas, hospitals, banks, schools, and when he died in 1989, he had a legitimate fortune worth in the hundreds of millions of dollars. He played a similar role to Meyer Lansky, but the basic difference between the two is Mo Dalitz was able to go straight. Meyer was never really able to make that turn because of his association with Lucky Luciano, and he did not die with a large, legitimate fortune, but Mo Dalitz did.
Yet casino owners face several problems, including limited financing. Bankers refused to lend money to casinos, questioning the morality of the business and whether the loans would be repaid. Casinos could rely on only two sources: the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, which was under the control of Alan Dorfman, the adopted son of an Al Capone lieutenant with ties to various organized crime figures, and the Bank of Las Vegas, operated by E. Parry Thomas, represented by a group of Utah bankers. Thomas reasoned that Las Vegas casino executives would respond in kind if treated like legitimate businessmen. He was right, but faced criticism that he was a mob banker. Alan Melnick Dorfman was a consultant to the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Central States Pension Fund. He was a close associate of longtime IBT president Jimmy Hoffa and associated with organized crime via the Chicago outfit. Dorfman was convicted on several felony counts and was murdered in 1983.
Alan Dorfman got a little greedy. He made a deal with an outfit guy named Joey Lombardo to try to bribe the Nevada senator named Howard Cannon. And together with a man named Roy Lee Williams, they used some Teamsters money to buy a piece of land that Howard Cannon really wanted, and then offered to sell it to Howard Cannon at a really low price. Well, there were some wiretaps and some bugs going at the time, and they caught them all up on that scam to attempted bribe of Senator Howard Cannon. Now, probably had they not popped him on that, Howard Cannon might have bought that land for a low price and sold out to the outfit. And that was really his downfall, because when they all caught the case behind that, I think Joey Lombardo got nervous, because it wasn't too long after that case came out that he was killed walking through a parking lot in a typical Chicago outfit manner. A guy ran up behind him with a .22 caliber and shot him in the back of the head and ran off to a waiting getaway car. That was the mark of the outfit.
Jimmy Hoffa became involved with organized crime from the early years of his Teamsters work, a connection that continued until his disappearance in 1975. He was convicted of jury tampering, attempted bribery, conspiracy, and mail-in wire fraud in 1964 in 2 separate trials. He was imprisoned in 1967 and sentenced to 13 years. In mid-1971, he resigned as president of the Union as part of a commutation agreement with U.S. President Richard Nixon and released later that year. But Hoffa was barred from Union activities until 1980. Hoping to regain support and to return to IBT leadership, he unsuccessfully tried to overturn the order. Hoffa disappeared on July 30, 1975. He is believed to have been murdered by the Mafia and was declared legally dead in 1982. Hoffa's legacy continues to stir debate.
Well, Jimmy Hoffa was most certainly killed by the mob, specifically Detroit, working with New Jersey. And the mystery about it is what happened to his corpse. And there have been a lot of diggings, 9 different diggings in the Detroit area alone, and a lot of outlandish stories. But probably the best story that has the most promise is that mobster from New Jersey, who Hoffa was supposed to meet before he disappeared, Tony Provenzano, had his body shipped to New Jersey and placed into an industrial waste dump inside of a barrel, just to sort of maybe have a bargaining chip, with the feds. If he got indicted, maybe he could say, well, I'll tell you where Hoffa's body is, so drop the charges. All right. Or maybe just to have a trophy. Nobody's really sure. Well, we know where that barrel was allegedly buried, and it's under some asphalt at a dump site in New Jersey. And there's a prominent author named Dan Maldia, and he's trying to get the authorities to allow that to be dug up to see if the barrel is actually there. And so that would be very interesting if the powers that be over there would permit that.
By the mid-1960s, organized crime figures were growing old. Many had come of age during the Prohibition era, during the 1920s, and they were tired of fighting the authorities. State officials wanted to attract more legitimate investors. Federal officials were cracking down. Then Howard Hughes came to town. Nobody knew it yet, but cracks were beginning to appear in the mob's hold on Las Vegas. It was the beginning of the end for mob rule in Sin City. From the 1950s into the 1960s, it had been a meteoric rise for the mob in Las Vegas. They had transformed a remote desert town into a thriving mecca for gambling, prostitution, and booze. But there was trouble in paradise. As the feds and local regulators cracked down on organized crime, a new face appeared on the desert horizon that would change everything. The man's name was Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes had become one of the world's richest men. His holdings in real estate, movies, and a vast empire of diversified investments had afforded him the luxuries of excess. As a younger man, he'd become a dashing playboy in Hollywood, wooing starlets and playing the role as a debonair and inventive aviator. But over the years, his behavior grew erratic, and mental health issues plagued him. Injuries from numerous aircraft crashes caused Hughes to spend much of his later life in pain, and he eventually became addicted to codeine. He'd grown reclusive and eccentric, moving from hotel to hotel, always occupying the upper floors and living in them for extended periods. On November 24, 1966, Thanksgiving Day, Hughes arrived in Las Vegas by railroad car and moved into the Desert Inn. Because he refused to leave the hotel and to avoid further conflicts with the owners, Hughes bought the Desert Inn in early 1967.
In the 60s and 70s, a lot of these old mobsters, they were getting older and they didn't have a lot of legitimate money. And what they did was they began selling the hotel casinos to people who could write them a legal check. And Howard Hughes was in the position to buy some of these hotels. What Howard Hughes and other legitimate owners did was they hired former FBI agents as executives. And they then approached mobsters who were reluctant to sell their casinos and basically said, I think you should sell. You know my friend Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. They were former FBI agents, and they have a lot of contacts in Washington in the Justice Department, and it would probably be a good idea for you to sell. And contrary to the popular belief of mobsters as these fearless characters, they were terrified of getting prosecuted in their old age, and it was easier to sell out than it was to maintain ownership of the casinos.
The hotel's 8th floor became the nerve center of Hughes' empire, and the 9th floor penthouse became his personal residence. Between 1966 and 1968, he bought several other hotel casinos, including the Castaways, New Frontier, the Landmark Hotel, and the Sands. He bought the small Silver Slipper Casino for the sole purpose of moving its trademark neon silver slipper, visible from Hughes' bedroom, as it had apparently kept him awake at night. Under increasing pressure from local and federal authorities, the mob had decided to sell its holdings in their Las Vegas hotels to Hughes, opening the door for corporate business interests to take over the ownership and management of these institutions, and thus began a cleanup of the grift and corruption that had permeated Las Vegas for over 2 decades. Hughes purchasing Las Vegas casinos ended hidden ownership by organized crime members such as Dalits in strip casinos. His involvement changed the nation's perception about the gambling business in Las Vegas. This new respectability encouraged public corporations to buy or invest in Nevada casinos as never before. Eventually, Hughes would sell his interests to Mormon investment groups, but the die was cast. Legitimacy had finally come to Las Vegas, but there were still unsavory elements at work as a violent new generation of mafia upstarts tried milking what was left of the Vegas cow. The Argent Corporation was a company in Las Vegas that at one time controlled the Hacienda Resort Hotel Casino, the Stardust Resort and Casino, the Fremont Hotel and Casino, and the casino in the Marina Hotel. The company was owned by Alan Glick, a young attorney and real estate investor from San Diego.
Alan Glick's biggest mistake might have been investing in Las Vegas in the first place. He first came into Las Vegas with some partners and bought the hotel casino at the far end of the strip, the Hacienda. Then he got a Teamsters loan of more than $62 million and bought the Stardust and Fremont and was involved in building the Marina. And along the way, he had actually gone to college or something with the son of the head of the Milwaukee mob, Frank Balistreri. But somewhere in there, Glick was told to hire Frank Rosenthal, and did, and made the discovery, he said, that actually he was working for Rosenthal, not vice versa, and Rosenthal made that very clear to him.
Glick obtained a $62.7 million loan from the Teamsters through Alan Dorfman to buy the Stardust and Fremont, and later claimed not to know that he answered to the Chicago, Kansas City, and Milwaukee mobs. If he didn't know, he soon found out when mob bosses installed Frank Rosenthal as their top executive at the 2 hotels. Rosenthal and his friends apparently devised a successful skimming operation that continued even after state gaming regulators forced them out and the new owners took over.
I serve at Mr. Glick's pleasure.
And could you describe Mr. Glick's pleasure?
You don't have enough time, Nick.
That's a good answer. We don't have enough time for that.
We see you growing more with the Argent Corporation, taking a higher position possibly?
That's a question for Mr. Glick.
And Mr. Rosenthal's in as high a position as you can have now.
Lefty Rosenthal was an American professional sports bettor, former Las Vegas casino executive, and organized crime associate. Rosenthal, who was once called the greatest living expert on sports gambling by Sports Illustrated, is credited with bringing sports betting to Las Vegas in the 1970s. Rosenthal's life and career in Las Vegas served as the basis of Martin Scorsese's 1995 film Casino, where he was portrayed by Robert De Niro and renamed Sam Ace Rothstein. In 1976, the FBI and Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department discovered that Rosenthal was secretly running 4 large casinos without obtaining a state gaming license, holding a hearing to determine his legal ability to obtain a license. The hearing was headed by Nevada Gaming Control Board Chairman and future U.S. Senator Harry Reid. Rosenthal was denied a license because of his arrest record and his documented reputation as an organized crime associate because of his association with Chicago mob enforcer Anthony Spilotro.
Frank Rosenthal was an illegal bookmaker from Chicago, had gone to Florida and other places, and went to Las Vegas because bookmaking was legal. And he was there to oversee the skim for the Chicago outfit and other Midwestern crime families. Tony Spilotro arrived in 1971 from Chicago to oversee Frank Rosenthal, the skim and street rackets for the Chicago outfit. Rosenthal and Spilotro both got into trouble because they were high profile. Rosenthal had a television show, he wrote a column for the Las Vegas Sun, he got into a public feud with Harry Reid, the chairman of the Nevada Gaming Commission. All that created a lot of heartache for the mob bosses in Chicago who didn't want their cash cow ruined by all the high publicity. And the same thing happened to Tony Spilotro. He was high profile. He came in the 70s and he had some of the same problems. He was a high profile person who created a lot of media attention. There were a lot of really aggressive reporters, Jane N. Morrison, Ned Day, Jeff Garrett. A lot of reporters focused a lot of attention on what was going on with the mob, and that created a lot of angst, a lot of agony for the mob bosses in the Midwest who didn't want that cash cow cut off. They saw that golden spigot drying up, and they didn't want it drying up.
On October 4th, 1982, Rosenthal survived an assassination attempt in Las Vegas in which a bomb attached to the gasoline tank was detonated when he started his car. Although never proven, most agreed Milwaukee mob boss Frank Balistrieri was responsible. Balistrieri, who was known as the Mad Bomber to law enforcement, was heard via wiretap blaming Rosenthal for the legal problems the mob-controlled casinos were suffering. Similarly, just weeks before the bombing, Balistrieri told his sons he intended to get full satisfaction for Rosenthal's perceived wrongdoing. Other likely suspects include Kansas City mob bosses who were recorded on an FBI wiretap tape calling Rosenthal crazy. Tony the Ant Spilotro was a suspect, either acting with others or on behalf of the outfit, and outlaw bikers who were friends of Rosenthal's ex-wife, Jerry McGee. Either way, the mob saw Rosenthal as a problem, and when that happens, people end up dead. Rosenthal left Las Vegas about 6 months later, never to return. With the takeover of legitimate corporations to manage its gambling palaces and an ever-vigilant local council to regulate the gaming industry, Las Vegas was poised for a new era of growth. The mob was on the run, and the cleanup had begun. But there would be one last gasp of life from the Mafia before the FBI would close in. Not until the 1970s and 1980s did the mob extend its power and profits beyond the Strip. The Las Vegas Gaming Commission, along with the relentless FBI task force, had largely succeeded in pressuring the mob out of Vegas, conceding its hotels and gambling interests to legitimate corporations. Before the final nail was driven into the coffin for the American Mafia in Las Vegas, another new face appeared in town. His name was Anthony Spilotro.
Las Vegas was an open town for the mob. Various cities had control of different casinos. The Chicago outfit would over time send people to Las Vegas to oversee their interests, Johnny Roselli and others. One of the ones they had in Las Vegas from Chicago was a person named Tony Spilotro, Anthony Spilotro. He was to oversee the street rackets in Las Vegas, got there in 1971, and oversee the skim, which was really being controlled by Lefty Rosenthal inside the Stardust for Argent. Spilotro was considered a really aggressive person. Again, he was sort of high profile. He made the news a lot. And so that created problems for organized crime the same way it did with Frank Rosenthal being high profile. A lot of people in the Midwest who oversaw the crime families in the Midwest were concerned about how high profile Spilotro and Rosenthal were. So Spilotro, over time, became something too high profile. Then in 1986, he and his brother Michael were taken to a home in suburban Chicago and beaten to death. They were buried in an Indiana cornfield. It had reached that point with the Midwestern mob many of whom had just been imprisoned in big trials, that they'd had enough with how high profile some of these people were in Las Vegas. It was killing the golden goose for them. They were so high profile.
Anthony Spilotro, nicknamed Tony the Ant, was an American mobster for the Chicago outfit who came to Las Vegas in 1971 to run a gift shop at Circus Circus. Spilotro managed the outfit's illegal casino profits, called the Skim, when 4 of the casinos, the Stardust, the Fremont, the Hacienda, and the Marina, were managed by Frank Rosenthal.
I think Tony Spilotro started as an asset to organized crime, and in the end, they saw him as a threat to what they were doing. He came to Las Vegas allegedly as the gift shop concessionaire at the Circus Circus, and he was ultimately supposed to be in charge of street crime and making sure the Skim went on. Now, the Skim was normal, but street crime really was not. It's really not until the mid to late 70s and early 80s that you see organized crime interests really involved in, we're going to have burglaries, and we're going to control the prostitution, and that sort of thing. And Spilotro's job was to deliver the goods, and he did. But eventually they got caught, and he spent a lot of time either in a courtroom or going to and from the courtroom. In the end, the mob kills him. Not, I think, because they thought he would talk, but because I think there was a fight over control of the mob, and they were upset with what had happened in Las Vegas. And maybe in the end, that was it. He started as an asset, and he turned into a liability.
Tony and 4 of his brothers, John, Vincent, Victor, and Michael, became involved in criminal activity starting at an early age. Spilotro was a boyhood friend of Frank Collada and started a criminal career together as teenagers, engaging in theft, burglary, and murder. He was nicknamed Tony the Ant by the media after FBI Special Agent William Romer referred to Spilotro as that little pissant. Since the media couldn't use pissant, they shortened it to the Ant. Spilotro was the leader of the Hole in the Wall gang, which he formed in Las Vegas when he moved there in 1971. The Hole in the Wall gang was a group of experienced thieves, safecrackers, and killers. The crew became known in the media as the Hole in the Wall gang because of its penchant for gaining entry to homes and buildings by drilling through exterior walls and ceilings of the locations they burglarized. In early 1979, Frank Collada moved to Las Vegas to join Spilotro. On July 4, 1981, the Hole in the Wall gang robbed Bertha's Gifts and Home Furnishings on East Sahara Avenue in Las Vegas. The robbery was a bust, as much of the gang was arrested, including Collada, Joe Blasco, Leo Gardino, Ernest Divino, Lawrence Newman, and Wayne Matecki. Each man was charged with burglary, conspiracy to commit burglary, attempted grand larceny, and possession of burglary tools. Around this time, Spilotro had an affair with Frank Rosenthal's wife. Her name was Jerry McGee, with details of the affair fictionalized in the movie Casino, directed by Martin Scorsese. State regulators soon listed him in the Black Book, thanks to allegations that he had been involved in perhaps 20 murders. The gang was apprehended by law enforcement. They were caught during a daring robbery. Federal prosecutors obtained several convictions and induced one of Spilotro's hitmen, Frank Collada, to testify and enter witness protection.
Frank Collada had come to Las Vegas at Spilotro's request to help Spilotro, sort of to serve as his lieutenant. They met at the Golden Steer restaurant, still in Las Vegas on Sahara, to give Collada his marching orders. Collada really oversaw a street rackets gang called the Hole in the Wall gang. They would knock a hole in the wall of places, businesses, homes, go in, burglarize it, and come out through the hole. That's why they were called the Hole in the Wall gang. And then in the early 1980s, they were busted trying to break into a jewelry store on Sahara near where later Frank Rosenthal's car would blow up. After he was arrested, Collada was told by federal agents that his life was in danger, that Tony Spilotro was going to have him killed. So Collada turned on Tony Spilotro. He became a witness for the federal government. That's one of the things, too, that led to Spilotro's undoing. Another thing that led to Spilotro's undoing, he was having a relationship with Frank Rosenthal's wife, Jerry. So those things kind of became the perfect storm of problems for the Midwestern mob with the crew they had in Las Vegas. When Collada turned on Spilotro, a lot of the house of cards began to crumble, because then he testified in court about some of the things that happened in Las Vegas. So Collada testified against Spilotro, and then Collada went on to enter the witness protection program and then got out and became a little bit of a mob celebrity. He conducted tours in Las Vegas. He was an advisor for the movie Casino, got paid to be an advisor for the movie Casino, was in the movie Casino as a hitman, ironically enough. He actually was a hitman. He had killed some people, including somebody in Las Vegas, on behalf of Spilotro. So that was Collada's significance, and he kept the mob story alive in Las Vegas. He had a YouTube show, and so after the movie Casino in 1995, especially after the movie, there's always been interest in the mob, but after that, it really sort of sparked interest in what happened in Las Vegas. So Collada kept a lot of that alive over time. Just died about a year ago of COVID-19, so in his 80s. So Collada's gone now. There aren't many people left from that era. One of the last mobsters from that era, somebody named Herbie Blitzstein, they called him Fat Herbie Blitzstein. He was an associate of Spilotro's. He died, was killed, executed, the last big mob execution in Las Vegas, Herbie Blitzstein, in the mid to late 90s. So all that era kind of came down in the 90s, and that put an end to that whole casino movie era that most people are familiar with.
In 1982, Collada was imprisoned. He was approached by the FBI with a wiretap of Spilotro talking with someone about having to clean our dirty laundry, which Collada took as an insinuated contract on his life. Due to this, in July 1982, Collada finalized an agreement with the prosecutors. In September 1983, Spilotro was indicted for conspiracy and obstruction of justice in the Sherwin Jerry Lister murder and released on $100,000 bail.
Frank Collada was a longtime friend of Spilotro, who was part of his burglary ring, was a hitman. And it wasn't so much that he was under law enforcement scrutiny as that he and Spilotro and what they called the hole-in-the-wall gang, the burglary ring, which got its name because they once blew a hole in the wall of a building they were going to rob. They were pretty obvious about things at times. That was the issue. They were obvious. They treated Las Vegas, and I think this was true of Rosenthal on the Strip, where his end was handling the skim. They treated Las Vegas as though it was their fiefdom. And Collada has talked over the years about how, we had this and we blew it. Well, maybe they did, and maybe it was time for it to be blown. But ultimately, Collada turns. To this day, there are people in Las Vegas who just refer to him as a rat. He testified. But in any case, he testified because he thought or became convinced that Spilotro was hanging him out to dry. Whether or not he actually was, they can decide for themselves.
At a trial in October 1983, Collada admitted that he was involved in over 300 crimes, including 4 murders, perjury, robberies, and burglaries. He also testified that Spilotro, his boss in Las Vegas, ordered him to make a telephone call that lured one of the 1962 murder victims, William McCarthy, to a fast food restaurant. In 1962, Collada had killed William McCarthy and James Miraglia, who were found dead in the trunk of a car on May 14, 1962. McCarthy's head had been placed in a vise and his throat slashed, while Miraglia strangled. Spilotro was acquitted later that year. Spilotro's defense attorney was future Las Vegas mayor Oscar Goodman. During his career as defense attorney, Goodman represented defendants accused of being some of the leading organized crime figures in Las Vegas, such as Meyer Lansky, Nicky Scarfo, Herbert Fat Herbie Blitzstein, Phil Leonetti, former Stardust Casino boss Frank Lefty Rosenthal, and Jamil Jimmy Chagra. One of Goodman's notorious clients was reputed Chicago mobster Anthony Tony the Ant Spilotro, who was known to have had a short and violent temper. In the semi-factual 1995 movie Casino, the character of Nicky Santoro was based on Spilotro and was portrayed by actor Joe Pesci. Goodman had a cameo appearance in the film as himself while defending Ace Rothstein, a character closely based on Lefty Rosenthal and played by Robert De Niro.
If I had to list the most fascinating characters in the history of Las Vegas, Oscar Goodman is going to be high on the list. He's a well-trained attorney, comes from a good family. He comes out to Las Vegas with his new young wife, Carolyn. They fall in love with the place ultimately, and he ends up representing organized crime figures. Now, at the time he started in the mid-'60s, defense work was not necessarily the kind of specialty it became, or that profitable necessarily. Lawyers tended to be generalists. There were a few big, prominent defense attorneys, yes. But Oscar Goodman is an example. He represented Rosenthal not only in terms of illegal activities that he was defending him, but for his gaming licensing. He could do all these things. Well, Goodman, when I was growing up, was on TV every day. You saw him going to and from court with somebody. He was being interviewed, and he's incredibly articulate. He's blunt. I've claimed for years, and I was wrong, frankly, that there was no filtration system between his brain and his mouth. No, if you are a really good defense attorney, and believe me, if I was in trouble, I'd want him to represent me, there's a filter. You know what you're doing and saying. And at the same time, that seeming lack of a filtration system helped get him elected.
Goodman currently owns and operates a steakhouse in Las Vegas and is a well-respected figure in the city. He also authored a book, Being Oscar, From Mob Lawyer to Mayor of Las Vegas. If truth could be said to be more ironic than fiction, Oscar Goodman's story would serve as the prime example. The federal crackdown on the mob and the indictments that followed for key members of the organization and its associates would be the final death blow. What is generally considered to be the mob era of Las Vegas ended in the mid-1980s with the death or imprisonment of many key players, and the corporate culture emerging on the Strip and downtown. With the mob's control nearly ended, the mid-1980s began a new era for Las Vegas. The men who now ran the town were no longer the godfathers, but new civic-minded leaders that had grand vision for their city of gold. Plans were underway to make Las Vegas a family attraction. But just as that was happening, the last vestige of mob control came to a violent end in an Indiana cornfield for one of Las Vegas's more notorious actors, that of Anthony the Ant Spilotro. Tony Spilotro faced numerous indictments by 1986, when he and his brother Michael traveled to Chicago in hopes of taking over the Chicago mob after the conviction of several of the old dons. Instead, their campaign failed. They disappeared, and they turned up dead. 9 days later, they were found buried in an Indiana cornfield near a farm owned by one of the convicted Chicago leaders. It is suspected that Spilotro and his brother Michael were called by Black Sam Carlisi to a meeting at a hunting lodge owned by Spilotro's former boss, Joseph Iupa. Original reports stated the Spilotros were savagely beaten and buried alive in a cornfield in Enos, Indiana. They were identified by their brother Pascal Jr. through dental X-ray records.
I would say part of the issue with his brother is that he was part of the family, which I use in a couple of ways, but certainly Spilotro's family and his own connections, his own loyalties were involved. And there's evidence to suggest that Tony was trying to protect Michael at the end as they were being killed. Now you've got the rest of the family. They had a brother who was a dentist. He wasn't a mobster, he was a dentist. But Michael was closer to the action, and that probably had a lot to do with it.
I would say if you're going to kill one brother, you better kill all the brothers. And Tony and Michael Spilotro were in business together in the gold rush out there. They were both running the hole-in-the-wall gang. They were, partners in crime as well as brothers in blood. The outfit in Chicago wanted to do Tony Spilotro. I think they needed to send a message to everybody else. They felt like it was his fault. He was to blame that the whole thing fell down in Las Vegas, that the FBI made all these cases on all the mob bosses in Chicago, Joey Aiuppa, Jackie Cerrone, Angelo La Pietra, Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. They felt like it was Tony Spilotro drawing so much heat, and he didn't keep Lefty under control like he was supposed to. He had this burglary gang going, and they all fell, and he was going to catch a case behind that, it looked like. There was Frank Collada had turned and was going to testify against him, against Spilotro, so he had a lot of heat on him, and more than likely, he had not been kicking back money from this hole-in-the-wall gang. That's another big no-no. It's to them, if you're one of their guys and you've got a nice piece of action coming in and you don't kick back at least a taste to them, you know, that's like stealing. To them, that's like stealing from you. They really lured Spilotro to a place where they could catch him alone without any witnesses by using his brother Michael. They claimed to Michael that they were going to make him. They were going to do a making ceremony that night. And of course, his brother would go along on that because he was a member of the outfit. And that's really how they got him into that basement where they could kill him without any witnesses around.
However, in 2007, mob assassin Nicholas Calabrese testified at the Operation Family Secrets trial in Chicago that the brothers were killed in a Bensonville, Illinois basement where the Spilotros believed Michael would be inducted into the outfit. According to court testimony, when Tony entered the basement and realized what was about to occur, he asked if he could say a prayer. By the time of Spilotro's slaying, federal authorities had convicted a string of Midwest Mafia bosses for skimming money at the Stardust, Fremont, and Tropicana casinos. Other mob figures had been convicted in Detroit and Las Vegas of wielding hidden influence at the Aladdin. The mob had lost its grip on the Strip, and its control over street rackets diminished. Enter the man who would change the face of Las Vegas forever, Steve Wynn. Wynn's first major casino on the Las Vegas Strip was the Mirage, which opened on November 22, 1989. It was the first time Wynn was involved with the design and construction of a casino. He financed the $630 million project, largely with high-yield bonds issued by Michael Milken. Its construction is also considered noteworthy in that the Mirage was the first casino to use security cameras full-time on all table games.
In 1989, a casino developer named Steve Wynn, who had ownership the Golden Nugget in downtown Las Vegas and been involved in different capacities in Las Vegas, built the Mirage. It's still in existence on the west side of the Las Vegas Strip. It was really a big themed resort, the first of the big mega resorts. It had a theme to it. It attracted families, and that kicked off a trend in Las Vegas of big mega resorts, the Excalibur, New York, the Luxor, big casinos that had rides and family attractions. Treasure Island with pirate ships. There was a volcano in front of the Mirage. All those sort of things sort of changed the way Las Vegas was.
The hotel became the main venue for the Siegfried and Roy show in 1990, and in 1993, the hotel hosted the Cirque du Soleil show, the Nouvelle Experience. Wynn's next project, Treasure Island Hotel and Casino, opened in the Mirage's old parking lot on October 27, 1993, at an overall cost of $450 million. The establishment was the home of the first permanent Cirque du Soleil show in Las Vegas. What was thought to have been the end of the mob in Las Vegas was to be short-lived. Fat Herbie Blitzstein, Tony Spilotro's right-hand man, was released from prison only to return to Vegas in the early 1990s. Fat Herbie picked up where he'd left off. After prison, the 62-year-old Blitzstein set up a downtown auto repair shop, a front for his loan shark and insurance fraud racketeering operations. In January 1997, Blitzstein was murdered, shot once in the back of the head in a contract hit and attempt to take over his racketeering business. Federal prosecutors contended during Fat Herbie's murder trial that mob families in Los Angeles and Buffalo, New York, had ordered Blitzstein hit so they could take control of his rackets.
Fat Herbie Blitzstein was another Spilotro crony from Chicago, who Tony brought in to help him with his criminal conspiracies. And he worked at Spilotro's jewelry store, the Gold Rush, and kind of helped with their fencing and various criminal activities. After Spilotro died, you had him in prison. When he got out of prison, he came back to Las Vegas and resumed street rackets. He was a loan shark, and he had more than $250,000 on the street, which was pretty good, and he would make money from the interest from inveterate gamblers. He also had a car insurance scam going on in a body shop that he owned with another person with mob ties. The problem for him was there were some low-level hoods again, and this was the 90s when you didn't have really smart, good people anymore in the mob. You had some low-level, not very bright people from the Buffalo mob and the Los Angeles mob coming in, trying to lean on the street rackets, and they wanted to take over Blitzstein's street rackets. He wouldn't cooperate, so they hired 2 hitmen to go in and kill him at his home.
By the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, a great transformation was taking place in Las Vegas. The old hotels were being demolished. Brand new palaces were being funded by corporate investment groups to replace the groups of petty gangsters into a money-making, board-friendly juggernaut. The gun had been replaced by the balance sheet. In the coming decade, the era of excess would culminate in a corporate-run empire that would make even the mob sit up and take notice. But the mob had been set packing. The American Mafia's hold on the United States was diminishing dramatically and would soon be almost completely eradicated. By the 1990s, the Las Vegas skyline was starting to become transformed. Large construction cranes loomed against the sky. Older hotels were being demolished as a new era dawned for the approaching new millennium. As the last vestiges of a bygone era were being imploded and being replaced anew, the question of the future of Las Vegas looked promising. On November 22, 1989, Steve Wynn opened the Mirage, the first new casino to be built in 16 years. It ignited a resort building boom that revolutionized Vegas into the 1990s and 2000s. The Rio, the Luxor, the Excalibur, and Treasure Island were soon to follow, offering themed entertainment, lodging, and dining experiences that rivaled world-class resorts.
Well, there was a line Steve Wynn had. Las Vegas doesn't need another casino, but it sure could use an attraction. And the opening of the Mirage in November of 1989 helps create that attraction. The Excalibur follows the following year. But they were still pretty much locally based people, even if they were involved in some other jurisdictions like Atlantic City, and Wall Street hadn't bought in. But it isn't until they're successful, and then Kirk Kerkorian, who had already built a couple of major properties, opens the MGM Grand in '93, and you're seeing more expansion, that corporate America really sees Las Vegas as a great investment.
But even a savior like Wynn was reputed to have links to organized crime, particularly to Morris Friedman. Friedman, who lived in Las Vegas, was linked to a branch of the Mafia in Detroit. When Wynn's father died, he left Wynn with $350,000 in gambling debts, but he'd also left his bingo parlor to his son, and Steve Wynn took it over. Using Friedman's contacts and a $30,000 loan from a family friend, Steve Wynn bought 3% of the Frontier Hotel on the Las Vegas Strip in 1965. The total cost of this venture was $45,000. He soon borrowed another $30,000 from a Las Vegas bank to acquire an additional 2% stake in the hotel and casino. This amount of shares allowed Steve to qualify for a small portion of the Frontier's gambling profits. In 1967, Steve and his wife, Elaine Wynn, moved to Las Vegas. He became the Frontier slot and casino manager. He was only 25 years old, but within a short time, Friedman was implicated in a card-cheating scheme in California, and his affiliation with the Detroit Mafia came to the surface. The Frontier's investors quickly sold the hotel casino to Howard Hughes for $24 million. As a minority investor who was only entitled to gambling profits, Stephen Wynn did not see anything significant from the sale. Wynn continued to borrow and invest in Las Vegas casinos until he was able to acquire enough shares in the Golden Nugget to become its chairman. He expanded his holdings to open another Golden Nugget in Atlantic City, but soon ran afoul with the New Jersey Casino Control Commission. In 1984, the commission had alleged evidence tying Wynn to New York mobster Anthony Salerno. Salerno had by then become America's top gangster in power, wealth, and influence. Known as Fat Tony, Salerno was a member of the Vito Genovese La Cosa Nostra organized crime family. The commission alleged that the mob was laundering money through Wynn's Atlantic City property. The charges were never proven, as there was no direct link between Wynn and the mobsters. However, the whole charade left a bad taste in Steve's mouth, and he sold the Atlantic City casino, making a profit of $260 million for the company. In the 1990s, Wynn conceived of a new kind of strip mega resort. As the years had gone by, the new resorts modeled after his vision had become more and more Disney-esque and cartoonish. He envisioned something more elegant that harkened back to the glamorous Rat Pack days of the Strip. He acquired the downtrodden Dunes Hotel site and had it imploded on live TV in 1993. 5 years later, $1.6 billion later, the Bellagio opened. Once again, Wynn had raised the standards for a new Strip resort. After the Bellagio opened, another building frenzy hit the Strip with competitors desperate to keep up with Wynn. The mega resorts boom born out of this time include Paris, Las Vegas, and Mandalay Bay. But unlike the gangsters who had come to Las Vegas and transformed a dusty speck of town in the middle of a barren desert into a neon-lit gambling mecca, Wynn had done it the legal way.
The biggest things that hurt organized crime in the 80s and 90s were, number one, the RICO law, which allowed broad capability for the government to prosecute people, even if they couldn't necessarily prove individual discrete crimes. Second, the competent leadership of the mob was dying off and aging, and so you didn't have as smart, talented people. You also had superior surveillance, where they were actually able to capture these guys on video and audio and prosecute them. You also had the rise of narcotics, and given the prison sentences for narcotics, you had a lot of people who were turning state's evidence and ratting out their superiors. So all of those things came together in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to cause really big trouble for the mob.
Las Vegas, Nevada. What was once a mecca for sin was now reframed as a Disneyland for adults who could also bring their families. As the building boom continued at a dizzying pace, the intent was clear: for its future to foster a family-friendly atmosphere. Themed hotels featured programmed experiences designed to appeal to the whole family. Gone were the days of strip joints and rampant prostitution, but it was never that far away for those who desired it. As Steve Wynn continued to expand his empire of themed hotels, some speculated the mob's influence might still have its tentacles in the profits. In 1999, mob attorney turned mayor Oscar Goodman, a former criminal defense attorney and self-described mouthpiece for the mob, denied the mob's existence in Las Vegas. He'd spent 35 years defending the nation's most notorious underworld figures. Besides Spilotro, Goodman's clients included mobsters Meyer Lansky and Frank Lefty Rosenthal. Goodman's denial occurred in 1999 during his first mayoral run. He issued this denial in a statement in the midst of the colorful Las Vegas trial. That trial involved two reputed mafiosi charged in connection with the execution-style hit of Blitzstein, who ran rackets in Las Vegas. Goodman wasn't the only one denying the mob's Vegas existence. The first denial of the mob began in the early 1990s as part of a public relations move touting Vegas as a family-friendly destination, when the Nevada Gaming Commission released the first of several documents assuring the public that the FBI had forced the last of the mob out of Las Vegas in the 1980s. But that was belied by the fact that Goodman himself had represented Anthony Spilotro in a mob trial in the mid-1980s, shortly before Spilotro was killed. What Las Vegas really needed was a white knight, and they got one in the form of Golden Nugget owner Steve Wynn and his $630 million gamble on the Mirage. Financed mostly through the sale of junk bonds, the hotel's construction would eventually change the course of Las Vegas history. The 1990s began with a blare of trumpets, heralding the rise of a turreted medieval castle, fronted by a moated drawbridge and staffed by jousting knights and fair damsels. Excalibur reflected the 1990s marketing trend to promote Las Vegas as a family vacation destination.
Today, very few corporations own most of the hotels. MGM, Caesars Entertainment, Las Vegas Sands Corporation, Wynn, Ruffin, those are most of the owners of the major strip hotels. The changes reflect the corporations, but also reflect that gambling is now legal in 48 of 50 states in some form. You don't have to come to Nevada to gamble. So what else is being offered? Well, you have foodie destination tourism, the celebrity chefs, shopping, pools, nightclubs. You have arenas for the major entertainers. And this does all go ultimately to the major difference corporations make.
Canadian circus theater group Cirque du Soleil transformed the entertainment scene in Las Vegas with the 1993 debut of Mystère, a newly opened treasure island. It would be the first of no fewer than 8 Cirque shows that would launch over the next 2 decades. The era of mega hotels continued on the Strip, including the new MGM Grand Hotel, backed by a full theme park, Luxor Las Vegas, and Steve Wynn's Treasure Island. In 1993, a unique pink-domed 5-acre indoor amusement park, Grand Slam Canyon, later known as Adventure Dome, became part of the Circus Hotel. In 1995, the Fremont Street experience was completed, revitalizing downtown Las Vegas. Closer to the Strip, rock restaurant magnate Peter Morton opened the Hard Rock Hotel, billed as the world's first rock and roll hotel and casino. The year 1996 saw the advent of the French Riviera's themed Monte Carlo and the Stratosphere Las Vegas Hotel and Casino. Its 1,149-foot tower made it the highest building west of the Mississippi. The unbelievable New York, New York arrived in 1997. But the surprise came in the early 2000s as Las Vegas decided to reinvent itself from a family destination to a luxury resort. Several new hotels opened, once again eclipsing anything that had come before. Bellagio was the latest from Vegas visionary Steve Wynn, an attempt to bring grand European style to the desert, while at the far southern end of the Strip, Mandalay Bay charmed. As if this weren't enough, the Venetian's ambitiously detailed recreation of Venice came along in May 1999 and was followed in short order by the opening of Paris Las Vegas in the fall of 1999. The 21st century opened with a bang as the Aladdin blew itself up and gave itself a from-the-ground-up makeover, which in turn only lasted for a handful of years before Planet Hollywood took it over and changed it entirely, while Steve Wynn blew up the Desert Inn and built a new showstopper named for himself. Along the way, everyone expanded, and then expanded some more, ultimately adding thousands of new rooms. The goal became luxury with a secondary emphasis on adult fun. Little by little, wacky eye-catching themes were phased out, as much as one can when one hotel looks like a castle, and generic sophistication took its place. Gaming was still number one, but the newer hotels were trying to top each other in terms of other recreations. Decadent nightclubs, celebrity chef-backed restaurants, fancy spas, and superstar shows.
When the mob controlled the casinos, they were skimming the money. That's where the money was. So, cheap entertainment, good food, but it's cheap. Nice rooms. Today, luxurious rooms. Major entertainment and arenas. Major shopping. Major food. And every department is supposed to be profitable. And that means the bargains that people used to see, you're less likely to find. It also means you're likely to see more elaborate entertainment, and you're likely to eat much better food.
The mob didn't really have serious casino interests in the 2000s. By that time, they had been run out. To the extent they had a presence at all, it was probably at the tail end of the unions, maybe local street crime. But given that that casino corporations had to literally sign away their civil rights to be executives, they did not allow for mob infiltration, not on the skim, not in the unions. And by the 2000s, the mob, for all intents and purposes, was really out of Las Vegas. There was nothing left for them in the casinos.
There's always this conflict between folks who have gone to Las Vegas for a long time and like Las Vegas. A lot of people will say, oh, Las Vegas was safer and more fun and more service-oriented back when the mob ran it than it is today with the corporations running it. And it's a lot slicker today. There is a lot more street crime today. Back then you had all these colorful characters like Benny Binion and other people like that who maybe were rumored to have killed somebody in the past and running those casinos and were out on the floor and everybody knew them, and they always had comments for the news people, and they just don't have that anymore at the corporations. It's pretty dry. They're all just employees of the company.
Through booms and busts, recessions and pandemics, Las Vegas has always sprung back. With legitimate corporations running the hotels, and government regulators policing the gaming licensing process, Las Vegas has regained an era of sophistication and respectability that is a far cry from its early days as a mob-run town. The story of Las Vegas is a fairy tale of immense improbability, one that belies even the strangest fictions. But as truth is often stranger than its counterparts, Las Vegas is the unbelievable story of how one small speck in the desert became a glittering metropolis of hedonism. As it struggled with its identity crisis, some speculated on whether or not organized crime, in the form of the American Mafia, still existed in Sin City. A group of journalists took the pulse of the beating heart of Las Vegas to find out if there still existed any last vestiges of the mob. Public interest in the subject of the Mafia's control over Las Vegas has never waned. Many books have been written about those years by both associates of the mob and the members of the law enforcement agencies involved in apprehending them. Before his death from COVID-19 at the age of 81, former gangster turned informant Frank Culotta wrote his book titled Culotta, The Life of a Chicago Criminal, Las Vegas Mobster, and Government Witness. But Frank Culotta's book is just one of hundreds which continued to be published, proving the public's insatiable hunger for hearing the story of organized crime. The public interest has never waned since the early years when city newspapers shouted headlines about the latest mob hits while outlining in lurid detail law enforcement's relentless pursuit of justice.
My book is called The Devil Himself. It is historical fiction. It is based on the true story of Meyer Lansky's involvement in World War II, his partnership with the U.S. Navy to help guard the ports of New York to prevent Nazi sabotage. And there had been sabotage, both Nazi and other types of sabotage, in and around New York. U-boats were spotted in the Hudson River. And as part of what was called Operation Underworld, Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky helped the Navy find contacts in Sicily to help plan for the Allied invasion. There's a lot of mythology around Operation Underworld. On one hand, you will have people tell you that it was a swindle, nothing ever happened. That's not true, nor is it true at the opposite end that Lucky Luciano came storming ashore with General Patton's army. But the mob did play a significant role in helping guard the ports and helping to make it inhospitable for Nazi sympathizers. And as a result, Lucky Luciano's 30 to 50 year sentence for pandering was commuted, and he was deported to Italy not long after World War II ended.
On February 14, 2012, the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement opened in downtown Las Vegas. The Mob Museum is dedicated to featuring the artifacts, stories, and history of organized crime in the United States, as well as the actions and initiatives by law enforcement to prevent such crimes. The museum is housed in the former Las Vegas Post Office and Courthouse, which was built in 1933 and is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The museum is located on Stewart Avenue, 2 blocks north of Fremont Street, the main artery of the downtown casino district. Developed under the creative direction of Dennis Barry, co-creator of the International Spy Museum and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the museum is governed by a nonprofit board, the 300 Stewart Avenue Corporation, in partnership with the City of Las Vegas. The museum is dedicated to the contentious relationship between organized crime and law enforcement within the historical context of Las Vegas and the entire United States.
The Mob Museum is one of the more popular and respected museums, I think, now in the U.S., and I take a little pride in that. I worked on it, though I'm not going to claim ownership. The building was the federal courthouse, which included every kind of federal operation when it opened in 1933. And as time went on, they moved everything out until there was very little left, and the federal government was going to close it and knock it down. Oscar Goodman had become mayor, and he said, wait a minute, I tried my first case there. I threw up on the courthouse steps. We can't lose this old building. Now, if you think about it, Las Vegas has the reputation for imploding buildings. Actually, the buildings that are imploded are older strip hotels that, unfortunately, and I hate to see the buildings go, they can't compete with the modern hotels. A federal building is a different thing. Well, the federal government said, okay, you want the building, we'll give it to you pretty much, but it has to be cultural. And Goodman really supported the idea of a museum about organized crime. And they did studies of what should we do. They interviewed people, and eventually it did come around to a museum of organized crime and law enforcement. Now, the curators who did it originally, Dennis and Kathy Barry, also had done the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the International Spy Museum, which, because of the subject matter, they're museums, but they're attractions. And that's what the Mob Museum would be, too. Now, I say we because I'm involved with the content. We have had to redo a lot of things, whether material no longer was available to us, or new things came out, or simply having to change with the times. But the museum opened on Valentine's Day 2012, and the day mattered because one of the key attractions is the wall from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And the museum has gone on over the next decade to be very popular, to be involved in the community, presenting programs on law enforcement, but also trying to give you both sides. It does not glorify organized crime in the least. At the same time, when we were working on it, we had law enforcement officials who said, you know, you also have to make sure you don't make us out to be perfect, which they weren't, and the museum conveys that. So the goal of the museum is to educate you and entertain you and inform you, and as any museum or documentary ought to do, teach you something, have you find it interesting, but also have you say, where can I find out more?
In telling both sides of the story, history cannot forget the brave men and women of law enforcement who worked tirelessly to bring justice to the streets of Las Vegas. The FBI, in conjunction with the Las Vegas Metro Task Force, were instrumental in bringing ruthless criminals to trial and getting convictions to stand. But the story could not be complete without the praise for the broadcast journalists and crime reporters in the media that were willing to risk their lives to bring the truth to the people. Though mob influence and control has left Las Vegas, what will happen to this city of sin? Las Vegas has a history of survival and resilience, and it's likely it will reemerge as one of the greatest success stories in history. But never forget its humble beginnings, a place that may never have come into existence without the American Mafia. This is Mark Wesley Curran. Thank you for joining us for this edition of American Mafia.